The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of the abandoned warehouse on Portland's industrial waterfront. Inside, among the dust and shadows, Emma Carson wielded her welding torch with hands that had once been steady as a surgeon's. Now they trembled with the early onset of Parkinson's disease, making every spark, every weld, a small victory against her failing body. At 32, she should have been at the peak of her career. Fresh from winning the prestigious Caldwell Fellowship, she'd been commissioned to create sculptures for corporate lobbies and museum exhibitions. The art world had been hers for the taking. Then came the diagnosis, delivered on a rainy October morning much like this one. Primary Parkinsonism, rare in someone so young, progressive, life-altering. The commissions had dried up when word got out. Collectors wanted perfection, not the trembling uncertainty of a sculptor whose hands betrayed her vision. Her health insurance, already stretched thin by experimental treatments, barely covered the basics. The warehouse studio, with its leaking roof and drafty walls, was all she could afford now. Emma stepped back from her current piece, a twisted sculpture of steel and copper that represented the chaos she felt inside. It wasn't beautiful in the traditional sense, but it was honest, raw, real. She'd been trying to sell her work at the Saturday market downtown, but art buyers wanted pretty things. Decorative pieces for their modern homes. Not the tortured expressions of a woman fighting her own body. Her phone buzzed. Another medical bill. This one for $12,000. She deleted the notification without opening it. What was the point? She couldn't pay it anyway. The warehouse door creaked open, letting in a gust of wet wind and a figure silhouetted against the gray afternoon light. "Hello!" A man's voice echoed in the cavernous space. "Is anyone here?" The door was open. Emma switched off her torch, lifting her welding mask. "Can I help you?" The man stepped into the light, and she immediately placed him in the category of people who'd never known real struggle. His coat was expensive, his shoes unsullied by the puddles outside. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm and had the confident bearing of someone used to getting what he wanted. "I'm looking for Emma Carson, the sculptor." Her stomach tightened. Process servers came unannounced too. "Who's asking?" "Marcus Webb. I'm the director of the Webb Foundation." He extended his hand, then seemed to notice her hesitation. "I'm not here to serve you papers, if that's what you're thinking. I'm here because I saw your work at the Saturday market 2 weeks ago." Emma remembered that day. She'd sold exactly nothing. People had looked at her sculptures with puzzled expressions, then moved on to the watercolor paintings and handmade jewelry in the next booth. "You must have me confused with someone else," she said, turning back to her work. "I don't make the kind of art people buy at markets." "No," Marcus agreed, walking closer. "You make the kind of art that makes people uncomfortable, that makes them feel something they'd rather not feel, which is exactly what the foundation is looking for." He set his portfolio on her work table, ignoring the metal shavings and oil stains. Inside were photos of a modern building, all glass and steel, overlooking the Columbia River. "This is the new trauma center we're opening in 6 months. State-of-the-art facility for treating PTSD, addiction, and trauma recovery. We need art for the main atrium, something that speaks to struggle, to transformation, to the beauty that can exist alongside pain." Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want me to create something inspirational? Something that says, everything will be okay? I don't make that kind of art anymore." "I don't want inspirational," Marcus said quietly. "I want honest. The people who'll walk through those doors don't need pretty lies. They need to know that someone understands their fight." He pulled out a checkbook. "The foundation is prepared to commission a large-scale installation, 15 feet tall, to be the centerpiece of the atrium. We're offering $80,000 for the completed work, with half paid up front to cover materials and studio costs." The number hit Emma like a physical blow. $40,000. enough to pay off most of her medical debt, enough to afford the newer medications her neurologist had mentioned, enough to buy her time. "Why me?" she whispered. "There are hundreds of sculptors in Portland, established artists who could give you something magnificent." Marcus met her eyes. "Because 3 years ago, my teenage son died by suicide. He'd been struggling with depression, and I'd been too busy building my career to notice how bad it had gotten. After his death, I threw myself into creating the foundation, but every piece of art people showed me felt hollow. Manufactured emotion. Then I saw your work. The piece with the fractured mirror and the twisted metal. It looked like grief. Real, ugly, devastating grief. And I realized that's what the center needs. Not comfort. Truth. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the drumming rain. "I have Parkinson's," Emma said finally. "My hands shake. Some days I can barely hold my tools. I can't guarantee the quality will be what you expect." "The disease doesn't define your art," Marcus replied. "If anything, it adds layers of meaning. Someone fighting their own body to create beauty. That's the story our patients need to see." Emma looked at her current sculpture, at the warehouse that barely kept out the elements, at her hands that trembled even now. She thought about the medical bills, the treatments she couldn't afford, the future that seemed to be narrowing to a pinpoint. "I'll need 3 months," she said, "and complete creative control. No committee approvals. No corporate interference. You trust my vision or you find someone else." Marcus smiled. "Deal. I'll have the contracts drawn up by tomorrow." He paused at the door. "Emma? Thank you. You're giving these people a gift, even if you don't realize it yet." After he left, Emma stood in the silent warehouse, staring at the check he'd left behind. $40,000. A lifeline. A chance. She picked up her sketchbook and began to draw. The next 3 months blurred together in a haze of metal and fire, pain and determination. Emma worked through the tremors, through the exhaustion that made her bones ache, through the moments when her body refused to cooperate with her mind's vision. The sculpture grew from her core, piece by painful piece. She created it in sections. Twisted steel representing the chaos of trauma, smooth copper curves showing the possibility of healing, and at the center, a void. An emptiness that viewers could fill with their own interpretations. Marcus visited weekly, never interfering but always interested. He'd bring coffee, sit on an overturned crate, and talk about his son. About the signs he'd missed. About the guilt that still woke him at 3 a.m. "You don't owe him anything?" Emma said one afternoon, her hands shaking as she tried to weld a particularly delicate seam. "You did your best with the information you had." "Did I?" Marcus watched her work, admiring the precision she maintained despite the tremors. "Or was I so focused on success that I forgot what mattered?" Emma set down her torch. "You're building a trauma center. You're trying to help people who are where your son was. That has to count for something. Does it count if I'm doing it for the wrong reasons? If it's about my guilt instead of their healing?" "Maybe," Emma said slowly, "healing isn't about having pure motives. Maybe it's just about showing up, even when you're broken, and doing the work anyway." She gestured at her sculpture. "This thing? I'm not creating it because I'm inspirational. I'm creating it because I need to prove I can still make something beautiful before my hands give out completely. That's selfish. But maybe someone will see it and feel less alone in their own struggle. Maybe selfish motives can lead to something good." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "My wife left after Daniel died. Said I'd become obsessed. That I was building a memorial instead of living." "Were you?" "Probably." He stood, stretching his back. "But somewhere along the way it became more than that. When I saw your work, I realized I wasn't just trying to save other people's kids. I was trying to understand my own pain through someone else's eyes." "Art therapy," Emma said with a slight smile. "Expensive art therapy." "The best kind," Marcus agreed. As winter turned to spring, Emma's sculpture took its final form. It stood 15 feet tall, a monument to struggle and survival. The twisted steel created shadows that shifted throughout the day, never showing the same face twice. The copper caught the light, offering glimpses of warmth amid the chaos. And at the center, that void, that absence, invited viewers to project their own stories onto its blank surface. 2 weeks before the installation, Emma's neurologist delivered news she'd been dreading. The Parkinson's was progressing faster than expected. Within a year, maybe 2, she'd lose the fine motor control needed for welding. Her career as a sculptor would effectively end. She didn't tell Marcus. She focused on finishing, on making every weld perfect, on pouring everything she had into this final major work. The installation day arrived with surprising sunshine, as if Portland itself was celebrating. A crane lifted the sculpture piece by piece into the trauma center's atrium, workers carefully bolting each section into place according to Emma's precise specifications. Marcus had organized an unveiling ceremony. Emma had argued against it, wanted the sculpture to simply appear one day, but he'd insisted. "These people need to see the artist," he'd said. "They need to know you're real." The atrium filled with people. Trauma survivors, therapists, donors, and members of the press. Emma stood to the side, feeling out of place in borrowed formal wear, her hands trembling visibly. A young woman approached her, maybe 25, with scars visible on her arms. "Did you make this?" she asked, gesturing at the covered sculpture. Emma nodded. "I hope it's honest," the woman said quietly. "I hope it doesn't pretend that healing is clean or simple or pretty." "It's not," Emma promised. "None of those things." Marcus took the microphone, and the crowd quieted. He spoke about his son, about the Foundation's mission, about the importance of art in healing spaces. Then he called Emma to the stage. She walked slowly, focusing on each step, on not letting her tremors show too obviously. When she reached Marcus, he handed her a cord connected to the covering. "I can't give a speech," she said into the microphone, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "I'm not good with words. But this sculpture, it's about surviving things that should break you. It's about the beauty that exists not despite the pain, but because of it. It's about showing up every day and doing the work, even when your body betrays you, even when success seems impossible." She pulled the cord. The covering fell away. The audience fell silent. Emma's sculpture towered above them, catching the afternoon light streaming through the atrium's windows. The shadows it cast were deep and complex, shifting as people moved around it. The copper gleamed. The void at the center seemed to pulse with possibility. Then someone started clapping. The young woman with the scars. Others joined, and soon the entire atrium echoed with applause. But Emma barely heard it. She was staring at her creation, seeing all its flaws and imperfections, the places where her trembling hands had made the welds less than perfect, the compromises she'd had to make with her failing body. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she started. It was better. The imperfections added character, showed the struggle in its creation. The sculpture wasn't just about survival. It was survival frozen in steel and copper. Marcus found her afterward, as the crowd mingled and photographers took pictures from every angle. "You did it," he said simply. "We did," Emma corrected. "You took a chance on a sculptor who couldn't promise perfection." "I didn't want perfection. I wanted truth." He paused. "The Foundation wants to commission more work from you. Smaller pieces for the therapy rooms. And I've had 3 other organizations ask for your contact information." Emma felt tears threatening. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. The Parkinson's is progressing faster than expected. Within a year or 2, I won't be able to do this kind of detailed work anymore. Then we'll adapt," he said without hesitation. "You'll work on larger pieces, use assistants for the detailed welding. Or you'll shift to a different medium entirely." Artists evolve. That doesn't mean they stop being artists. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. Nothing about survival is simple. But you've already proven you can create beauty while fighting your own body. Why would that stop now? That evening, as the sun set over the Columbia River, Emma stood alone in the atrium with her sculpture. The changing light transformed it moment by moment, revealing new depths, new meanings. The young woman with the scars returned, standing beside Emma in companionable silence. "I tried to kill myself last year," the woman said quietly. "Spent 3 months in treatment. Everyone kept telling me it would get better, that I'd heal, that the pain would fade. But that felt like a lie. The pain didn't fade. I just learned to carry it differently." She looked up at the sculpture. "This gets it. It doesn't promise the pain goes away. It shows that you can build something meaningful around it. With it. Because of it." Emma felt something shift inside her chest. "What's your name?" "Sarah." "Sarah. Would you like to help me create the smaller pieces for this center? I need an assistant. Someone who understands what this work is really about." Sarah's eyes widened. "I'm not an artist. I don't know anything about welding or sculpting." "Neither did I once," Emma said. "But you understand struggle. You understand survival. That's the most important qualification." Over the following months, Emma taught Sarah the basics of metalwork. They created smaller sculptures for the therapy rooms, each one a meditation on a different aspect of trauma and healing. Sarah's hands were steady where Emma's shook, but Emma's vision guided every piece. Marcus visited often, sometimes bringing his late son's journals. He'd read passages aloud while they worked, sharing his son's pain and poetry with these two women who understood the weight of carrying darkness. "He wrote this a week before he died," Marcus said one afternoon, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm tired of pretending to be okay. I'm tired of performing happiness for people who can't handle my sadness. I want to feel real, even if real means broken." Emma set down her torch. "Do you think he'd like the center?" "Honestly," Marcus considered, "I think he'd appreciate that we're not pretending, that these sculptures don't offer false hope or easy answers. He'd recognize the honesty in that." "That's all we can do," Sarah said softly. "Be honest about how hard it is. That's the only way through." The trauma center opened to widespread acclaim. Media outlets praised the innovative approach to healing spaces, the integration of raw, honest art into clinical environments. But the real measure of success came in quieter moments. Patients who stood before Emma's sculptures and cried, who touched the metal and felt understood, who saw their own struggles reflected in twisted steel and polished copper. Emma's career transformed. She became known for creating art about disability, chronic illness, and survival. Universities invited her to speak. Museums requested pieces. But she stayed focused on work that mattered, projects that helped people feel less alone in their struggles. The Parkinson's continued its progression. Within a year, Emma could no longer handle detailed welding work. But Marcus had been right, she adapted. She shifted to larger, bolder pieces where the tremors in her hands became part of the artistic process. She trained a team of assistants, including Sarah, who could execute her vision while she directed. 2 years after the trauma center opened, Marcus approached Emma with a proposal. "The foundation wants to create a fellowship in your name, supporting artists with chronic illnesses or disabilities, giving them the chance you got." Emma stood in her warehouse studio, now heated and weatherproofed thanks to her commission work, surrounded by assistants and projects in various stages of completion. Sarah was teaching a new intern the basics of torch work. Another assistant was preparing molds for a commission from a children's hospital. "Why?" Emma asked. "I'm not special. I just kept working because I didn't know what else to do." "That's exactly why," Marcus said. "You showed people that creativity doesn't end when your body fails. That art can emerge from struggle. That's a lesson worth investing in." Emma thought about the warehouse as it had been 2 years ago, leaking and cold, about the medical bills she couldn't pay, about the despair that had settled over her like fog. "Okay," she said, "but I want to be involved in selecting the artists. And the fellowship needs to cover medical expenses, not just art supplies. These artists need to survive before they can create." Agreed. The fellowship launched 6 months later. The first recipient was a painter with multiple sclerosis, whose trembling hands created haunting, ethereal landscapes. The second was a photographer with degenerative vision loss, documenting the world as it slowly disappeared from view. Each artist brought their own truth, their own survival story, to their work. Emma became a mentor, teaching not just technique but resilience. She showed artists how to adapt their methods as their bodies changed, how to channel frustration into creativity, how to see disability not as an ending but as a different kind of beginning. On the 3rd anniversary of the Trauma Center's opening, Marcus hosted a celebration. The atrium was filled with people whose lives had been touched by the center, by Emma's art, by the honesty that both represented. Sarah, now a sculptor in her own right, had created a piece for the occasion. It echoed Emma's original sculpture but added something new, thin threads of gold weaving through the chaos, catching the light. "It's called connection," Sarah explained to the gathered crowd, "because Emma taught me that we don't heal alone. We heal in the spaces between us, in the threads that connect our struggles and our survival." Emma stood with Marcus, watching the crowd admire Sarah's work. Her hands trembled constantly now, making even simple tasks difficult. But she'd learned to live within the limitations, to find new ways to create and contribute. "Your wife," Emma said quietly. "Did she ever come back?" Marcus shook his head. "No, but I've made peace with that. Some relationships don't survive tragedy. That doesn't mean the tragedy wins. What wins then? This." He gestured at the atrium, at the art, at the people finding hope in honest expressions of struggle. Connection, creativity, survival, those things win. Emma thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, desperate and alone in a leaking warehouse, about the sculptures she'd created since, each one a testament to persistence, about the artists she'd mentored, the lives touched by her willingness to be vulnerable through her art. "I used to think art was about beauty," she said, "about creating something perfect that would last forever. And now I think it's about truth, about showing people they're not alone in their imperfection. That's what lasts. Not the metal or the craftsmanship, but the connection between struggle and recognition." A young veteran approached them, his prosthetic leg visible below his shorts. "Ms. Carson? I just wanted to thank you. I come here twice a week for treatment. Your sculpture, I stand in front of it every time I'm here. It helps me remember that I'm not the only one carrying heavy things." After he walked away, Emma felt tears streaming down her face. Not sad tears, grateful ones. "You gave me more than a commission," she told Marcus. "You gave me purpose when I thought my purpose was ending." "No," Marcus corrected gently. "You found it yourself. I just opened a door. You walked through it, even when every step was painful. That's all courage is, really. Showing up when it would be easier to give up." As the celebration continued around them, Emma watched people interact with the art, with each other, with their own reflections in polished metal. She saw Sarah mentoring a younger artist, passing on the lessons Emma had taught her. She saw Marcus talking with a donor about expanding the fellowship program. She saw proof that survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about transforming pain into purpose, struggle into service, personal tragedy into collective healing. Her phone buzzed. Another artist requesting mentorship. Another hospital wanting a commission. Another opportunity to turn her ongoing battle with Parkinson's into something meaningful. Emma smiled, her trembling hands steady enough for now, and began planning her next piece. 5 years after that first commission, Emma Carson stood in a gallery in New York City. Her retrospective exhibition, The Beauty of Survival, featured works spanning her career, including photographs documenting the progression of her Parkinson's and how it had influenced her artistic evolution. She no longer welded. Her assistants executed the technical work while she directed, her trembling fingers pointing, her voice steady as she described each curve and angle. Some critics claimed this diminished her artistic authenticity. Others argued it expanded the definition of authorship, challenging assumptions about the physical requirements of creation. Emma didn't care much about the critical debates. She cared about the letters she received from people who saw themselves in her work. From patients in hospitals where her sculptures stood. From artists with disabilities who'd been told they'd have to give up their craft. From survivors of trauma who found validation in her honest depictions of struggle. Marcus had flown in for the opening, older now but still carrying photographs of his son. They'd become friends, bonded by shared understanding of loss and survival. Daniel would have been 23 this year, Marcus said, standing before a sculpture called Absence. It featured a void in the shape of a teenager, defined by what surrounded it rather than what filled it. Tell me about him, Emma said. Something you've never told anyone. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He liked to paint. Terrible paintings, objectively, but he'd spend hours on them so focused. I used to interrupt him, tell him to finish his homework, to focus on practical things. I never just let him paint. So you let other people paint now, Emma said. Through the fellowship, through the center. You give them the time you wished you'd given him. Is that enough? It has to be, Emma replied. We can't change the past. We can only honor it by doing better in the present. Sarah arrived with a young man who moved with the careful precision of someone managing chronic pain. Emma, this is James. He's applying for the fellowship. Photographer with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Emma studied his portfolio while he fidgeted nervously. His photographs captured the hidden disability experience. The effort behind simple movements, the isolation of invisible illness, the gap between appearing fine and feeling broken. These are exceptional, she said finally. They're honest without being despairing, difficult without being hopeless. That's rare. I learned from your work, James said. You taught me that disability doesn't disqualify you from art. It just changes what you have to say. After the opening, Emma returned to her hotel room, exhausted but satisfied. Her phone showed dozens of messages. Interview requests, commission offers, personal notes from people touched by the exhibition. But the one that made her cry was from the young woman with scars, Sarah, who'd become her first assistant 5 years ago. You saved my life, the message read. Not because you fixed me or made the pain go away, because you showed me that broken people can still create beauty. That survival isn't about becoming whole again. It's about learning to build with the pieces that remain. Thank you for teaching me to weld. Emma thought about the warehouse where this had all begun, about the desperation that had driven her to accept Marcus's commission, about the sculptures she'd created since, each one a meditation on survival. She opened her laptop and began drafting a letter to the next fellowship recipient. Dear artist, your work moved me not because it's perfect, but because it's true. You've taken your struggle and transformed it into something that helps others feel less alone. That's the highest form of art. This fellowship comes with no strings attached. Create what you need to create. Tell the truths only you can tell. Don't worry about commercial viability or critical acclaim. Worry about honesty. Worry about connection. Worry about showing others who struggle that they're not walking this path alone. The money won't solve all your problems. It won't cure your illness or erase your disability, but it will buy you time to create, space to breathe, permission to prioritize your art even when your body makes that difficult. Use it well, not because you owe anyone anything, but because your voice matters, your perspective matters, your survival matters, And when you're established, when you've found your footing, reach back and help the next artist climbing this same steep hill. That's how we build ladders out of struggle. One artist helping another, one work of truth at a time. With admiration and solidarity, Emma Carson. She sent the letter, then stood at her hotel window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere in this city, in cities around the world, artists were fighting their own battles with bodies that betrayed them, circumstances that crushed them, odds that seemed insurmountable. Some would give up, some would push through, and a few would transform their struggle into art that changed how others saw survival. Emma had been lucky. One chance encounter with Marcus had given her the resources to continue creating. But she knew luck wasn't enough. Systems needed to change. Support needed to exist for all struggling artists, not just the ones fortunate enough to meet the right benefactor. That's why she'd begun speaking publicly about arts funding, disability rights, and the importance of honest representation in creative spaces. Why she testified before committees about the need for medical coverage that allowed chronically ill people to pursue creative careers. Why she pushed back against galleries that claimed disabled artists were difficult or unreliable. Her phone rang. "Marcus, I saw the exhibition," he said. "It's remarkable. You've come so far from that warehouse." "We've come far," Emma corrected. "This wouldn't exist without your commission. Your belief that my trembling hands could still create something meaningful." "My belief didn't create the art, Emma. Your persistence did. Your refusal to let Parkinson's define your entire identity. Your willingness to adapt instead of quit." "Some days I wanted to quit," she admitted. "Some days the pain was so bad I couldn't see the point of continuing." "But you didn't quit." "No," Emma agreed. "I didn't quit. Because somewhere along the way, I realized my survival wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every artist who'd been told their disability disqualified them from creative work. Every patient who needed to see honest art about struggle. Every person who felt alone in their fight to keep going. They talked for another hour about the fellowship expansion, about new commissions, about the upcoming documentary on Emma's artistic process. But mostly they talked about the thing that connected them. The understanding that tragedy doesn't have to have the final word. That people who've survived terrible things can build something beautiful from the wreckage. After hanging up, Emma opened her email to find a message from a teenager with juvenile arthritis who'd seen her exhibition and wanted to pursue sculpture despite her diagnosis. Emma began typing her response. "Dear artist, yes, your arthritis will make sculpting harder. Yes, you'll have to modify techniques and tools. Yes, there will be days when the pain makes creating feel impossible. Create anyway, not because it's easy, but because your voice deserves to be heard. Because the world needs art from people who understand struggle. Because showing up despite the obstacles is its own form of beauty. I can't promise you success. I can't promise the pain will be worth it. But I can promise you won't be alone. There's a whole community of artists with disabilities, chronically ill creators, people who refuse to let their bodies have the final say about their dreams. Find them, learn from them, and when you're ready, teach the next scared teenager that disability doesn't mean the end of creativity. It just means a different kind of beginning. Welcome to the community. Welcome to the struggle. Welcome to the beautiful, difficult, worthwhile fight to create despite everything. With solidarity, Emma Carson. She sent the message, then looked at the clock. 2 a.m. Her hands trembled with fatigue and medication timing. She should sleep. Instead, she pulled out her sketchbook and began drawing plans for her next piece. A sculpture about community, about the threads that connect struggling people, about the way survival becomes possible when we refuse to face it alone. The Parkinsons would progress. Her hands would continue to fail, but her vision, her voice, her determination to transform struggle into meaning, those things remained steady. Emma Carson had started as a desperate artist in a leaking warehouse, selling her work to fund treatments that might not work. She'd become something more. A voice for disabled artists. A symbol of creative resilience. Proof that endings could transform into beginnings if you refused to give up. But more than any of that, she'd become someone who showed others that survival wasn't about fighting alone. It was about reaching back to pull others up, about creating community from shared struggle, about transforming personal pain into collective healing. Her sculpture stood in that trauma center atrium, casting its changing shadows, reminding patients every day that struggle could coexist with beauty, that imperfection could be its own form of art, that surviving was worth celebrating, even when it wasn't easy or clean or simple. And across the country, in studios and bedrooms and hospitals, artists with disabilities looked at Emma's work and thought, maybe I can do this too. Maybe my struggle doesn't disqualify me. Maybe my broken hands can still create beauty. That was Emma's real masterpiece. Not the sculptures of steel and copper, impressive as they were, but the permission she gave others to keep creating despite the obstacles. The validation that their voices mattered. The proof that disability didn't mean the end of artistic identity. As dawn broke over Manhattan, Emma finally set down her sketchbook. Her hands trembled, her body ached, but her mind was full of visions for future works. Projects that would push boundaries, challenge assumptions, and remind the world that some of the most beautiful art comes from people fighting the hardest battles. She thought about Marcus and his late son, about Sarah and her scars, about James and his chronic pain, about all the artists the fellowship would support, about the teenager with arthritis who was just beginning her journey. Emma smiled, her trembling hands steady enough for this moment, this quiet dawn when everything felt possible despite the obstacles. She'd started by trying to survive. She'd ended up helping others do the same. And that, she realized, was the point of art. Not to escape reality, but to illuminate it. Not to offer false hope, but to provide genuine connection. Not to pretend struggle doesn't exist, but to show that beauty can exist alongside it. The rain had returned, drumming against her hotel window like applause. Emma Carson, sculptor, mentor, survivor, closed her eyes and let herself rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tremors, new battles with her failing body, but also knowing she wouldn't face them alone. That somewhere, other artists were waking up and picking up their tools despite the pain. That the community she'd helped build was growing stronger. That struggle shared became struggle survivable. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.